In this video, I will focus on 4 aspects of awareness when supporting individuals with a PDA profile, and I hope it will provide a curiosity-based introduction that will build compassion and responsive paths forward for PDAers in our homes and communities. You're in the right place if you're working alongside PDA students with high levels of anxiety or resistance to traditional supports, regardless of a diagnosis. You also belong here if you are wanting to grow your teaching toolbox to acknowledge neurodivergent students and more complex learners, or if you're an individual looking for more insights, strategies, and support ideas when working alongside individuals with a PDA profile. If you're new to PDA, Pathological Demand Avoidance, or PDA, is most commonly understood as a profile most often occurring in autistic individuals. In the PDA community, it's often described as a persistent drive for autonomy and includes an anxiety-driven need for control. Important to note is that although aspects of demand avoidance can be understood in small ways as part of the human condition, the PDA profile is a life-altering state for individuals and includes avoidance of both internal and external demands that may present in many, if not all, aspects of life in varying degrees. Working alongside individuals presenting with PDA traits can present unique needs for caregivers and educators as they try to understand and adapt their care in ways that support the individual in front of them. I hope that this video will be the first step in awareness and build empathy into your work with students who may need adapted approaches to learning. In the late 1800s, canaries were used to detect dangerous substances in the coal mines, such as carbon monoxide. Their presence formed an early warning sign to alert miners to danger, as their systems were more sensitive and more alert to danger in their environment. This gave others early indicators and the opportunity to change their environment before dangerous levels were reached. However, it wasn't a great situation for the canaries, as you can imagine. Much like canaries in the coal mine, individuals with a PDA profile are sensitive and attuned to their environments. Their early warning systems are often on high alert, even when circumstances look fine to others around them. In fact, being biologically in this chronically alert and hypervigilant state means that even if there's no visible danger, their body systems are often responding as if their lives are at risk. I believe that building supports for individuals with PDA traits, the first step is an awareness and empathy. Please note, this video is based on my observations and research as a parent and educator and is not intended for medical or therapeutic use or advice. It is also not my intention to speak over or on behalf of autistic voices in our community, and I hope this opens respectful conversations of support and awareness. As you lean in to supporting students with a PDA profile, you may note that each student you work alongside will require their own personalized supports that keep in mind their interests, their capacity, and their sensory load from moment to moment. I personally believe that working with PDA learners has the potential to transform your approach to teaching for both typical and atypical learners as you lean into a collaborative, respectful, and curiosity-driven approach that nurtures learners with a sense of autonomy and choice. Let's talk about the 4 different aspects of awareness in working with PDA students, as well as an educator takeaway for each of those. The first I'll mention is transition. For a highly sensitive student, it's important to remember that just the aspect of transition can tap internal resources and spike a central nervous system response. By the time your student leaves their home and navigates the demands of their comfortable spaces, or leaving at a set time, transitioning into clothing or footwear, gathering supplies or resources, and then entering into different modes of transportation, they may already be far beyond their capacity to regulate, and their sensory system may be deep into an activated survival mode state, regardless of whether or not they genuinely wanted to have the capacity to participate in an activity or to attend a lesson. That's even before they attempt the demands attached to entering a new environment and the unpredictability of entering new spaces or educational demands. For many educators, the natural inclination may be to create structure and predictability as an antidote to the dysregulation of unpredictability. But also remember that the very nature of autonomy seeking in a PDA profile means that loss of control of following somebody else's plan upon arrival can spike anxiety and trigger flight, fight, fawn, freeze responses and make those conventional strategies highly ineffective. Resistance to transition can be common for PDAers and oftentimes debilitating, even if they want to participate. Our first educator ponder: how can we stay curious about ways to add a sense of autonomy and choice when welcoming students into our spaces and ease stressors for students? What could that look like? So as you're listening in today, feel free to ask questions in the comments. I would love to build that comment section as part of a respectful, safe place to build awareness in working alongside our students. Regulation. With a central nervous system that's chronically activated, most PDAers will have an intense need for regulation. Important to note is that as educators, we often rush to encouraging self-regulation, and though that's a wonderful goal, many PDAers will have an intense need for attuned supports and consistent co-regulators to be able to navigate moving through their days. In order for a student to be able to learn and process information, a certain degree of regulation must be present. If you've ever worked with a student who seems unresponsive or detached, maybe is moving rapidly or seeming out of control, or perhaps volume levels are high-pitched or elevated, those can all be signs that their body is feeling dysregulated and they may need supports to be able to come back into a state of regulation. The student in front of you may be battling internal and external regulatory systems that run well outside the lanes that you typically see in learners. As humans, we lean into our regulatory systems to feel that internal state of balance and safety, which provides a foundation for learning. Many of our students are struggling visibly and invisibly with regulatory needs, and that creates a direct impact on their capacity to learn and feel safe in environments that they are in. Our second educator ponder is this: I found it helpful to consider ways to add regulation support for learners in my care and to prioritize co-regulation as a primary goal of our time together. It's helpful to remember that this aspect is so very personalized when building trust. For myself, that also means welcoming a learner's safe grown-ups into my space and brainstorming collaborative approaches that build student autonomy and maintain connection. Awareness number 3, sensory load. Each time we work alongside a learner, it's valuable to acknowledge that their sensory system and the way they experience and process internal and external sensory input may be wildly different from ours. As we look for ways to support students, I feel a first step is to ponder sensory needs as part of a whole child approach to learning. If you're working alongside a student who has access to an aware care provider or an occupational therapist, this may be a starting place of collaboration in creating safe learning spaces. The data collected in the realm of vision, hearing, touch, taste, smell, balance, and our interoceptive systems informs our perception of the world around us. Hear me out. For students with the PDA profile, their sensory system may be filled with overwhelm and can be actively creating multiple alerts and a sense that the environment is unsafe. Though your students with a PDA profile will create more urgent needs for an adapted approach, again, this awareness of student needs and that link to visible behaviors may start to create a ripple effect in your teaching that could have you observing your own sensory needs and those around you with more awareness and care. Educator takeaway number 3. It may be helpful to observe behavior cues as hints to better know the student in front of us. Whether or not your student is verbal, it's highly likely that their behavioral cues may present their sensory needs before they're able to let you know in more typical ways. For some, they may never be able to use verbal requests to express those needs. Here are some ways I now view behavioral clues that may prompt opportunities to start brainstorming clues that you've observed too. Oftentimes, visible behaviors may be perceived as bad behavior, but noticing these early on may be your chance to problem solve and create opportunities for success. As a music teacher, I may observe and ponder some of these domains, and you may start to brainstorm behavior clues in your environment as well. So for me, I might see a behavior clue such as busy hands or banging keys. Now, let me note that sometimes busy hands or exploring the keys can be a very positive stim and is actually regulating. So there is a lot of nuance here. But I might be observing and thinking, does the child struggle with impulse control? Is this a stim that's a happy stim, an enjoyment stim? Or is the student finding the lesson upregulating or overstimulating? Are the demands in lessons overextending their ability to cope? Or is the child becoming anxious about meeting their own or others' expectations for them? Posture. Posture is another great clue in the music teaching realm, and you can start to think about what sort of clues you have in your environments. So I might be watching to see if staying balanced at the bench seems like a struggle, or if it seems that that's a comfortable position for my students. Do they need supported seating? Is their core weak? Is their body tired or needing hydration? So how a student presents on the bench in front of me is part of what I might observe so that I can problem solve on their behalf. The other thing I might observe is the sound of their voice, and if I'm hearing loud sounds or quiet sounds, shouting or high-pitched voices, I would be using the sounds they're making to try to discern if there's a hint at feeling dysregulated. If the behaviors are getting increasingly more frantic, I might know that I need to add more support and more regulation. Again, this isn't an attempt to control the child. This is actually an attempt to add support for the child in the ways that best suit them. The other thing is I might notice that it could be a first clue that their sensory system is being overwhelmed. So a music environment is often overstimulating because there's lots of sounds to discern and lots of newness. The other thing is they could be overloaded and blocking sounds with sounds of their own, as well as do they struggle with hearing variances of sound. So there's lots of clues that we'll be gaining from the child, and you might feel like a detective at times trying to figure out how to best support the child. So thanks for listening into my hypothetical scenarios. I'm challenging myself first to see what the behavior is telling me about where the child is at, and admit that the learning curve over here is real on the daily. I've also found it helpful to study signs of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn to build awareness and to be able to recognize those subtle signs in students before behaviors escalate. Notable is that often your PDA students can cycle very quickly from a regulated state to a stress response. Our fourth and final aspect of awareness is autonomy. This one's important and is part of the PDA profile. I often love to use the term gifting autonomy as a reminder to myself about the approaches we can take when working with students. This approach is essential to our work alongside PDA students, and much like musical proficiency may take years and years of practice to feel more fluent in the musical language, I find that practicing a low demand approach in our language takes a lot of practice. PDA students are often very aware of unauthentic attempts and can sense if a teacher or care provider is manipulating them by perceptions of choice or bribery. Their threat-sensitive systems can make traditional approaches ineffective. Oftentimes, use of behavior charts, this, then that systems, rewards, or punishment create unhealthy cycles into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn behaviors that are not sustainable or healthy for the child. Educator ponder number 4. When working alongside individuals presenting with PDA traits, we can practice shifting our language to reduce an anxiety response in students. Phrasing that might be helpful is using terms like, I wonder if. I'm curious. Let's see if. I also find it helpful to remove demand phrases like don't, no, you shouldn't. Interestingly, for PDA profiles, rewards and praise can also create a demand loop and spike anxiety. I often try to explore observations that feel less personal, like, oh, that's a neat sound, instead of I love how you did that, or that reminded me of, or what an interesting mood that creates. I'll link a book about declarative language recommended from the PDA Society website in the video description, alongside some other sources, so you can do some research of your own. There are some other ways you can support PDA families as well as students, and one of them in our domain as music teachers is understanding attendance variables and building policies that support your needs as a service provider but provide value and flexibility. In my studio, that means if a student cannot attend, I have ways of utilizing that lesson time on their behalf. Throughout the lesson, as an online teacher, I also allow for cameras on or off. I allow students to stay near the camera or to retreat away from the lesson when needed, with choice as to when or if they return, and with no pressure on the parent to try to rope them back into lessons. This takes time and trust to build an environment that allows for that flexibility. In a studio space, that might mean creating safe spaces that are retreat spaces as well as at the instrument, and you might consider adding sensory support to those spaces away from the piano and giving students the ability to end the lesson at a time that's comfortable for them while building trust and rapport. If you're new here, feel free to say hello in the comments, and I hope that this video was helpful. I'm also learning as both a parent and educator and guarantee that I don't always get it right. I must say I'm completely humbled to be sharing with you today, and know that this virtual living room is filled with so many other highly intuitive parents and educators that also have so much to share. My hope is that the conversation is one that we can see continue in our profession, and that it will build increasing compassion and professional development among music teachers. Dr. Wayne Dyer once said, "Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change." I hope that this video today will offer you fresh perspective as you work alongside students learning outside the lines. Thanks for being here.